Welcome to Senior's Last Word. I'm Aldrin Suga Senior. We now know who is in the final. That's Spain taking on England. But before we do a series for the final itself, I think before we need to look back a bit at some of the interesting scenarios. Today we are looking at the flops of Euro 2024. Who has flopped and why? And at the end, I'll tell you who I think is the biggest flop. We shall begin with Germany because they're the hosts, three-time winners, and they are hoping to go all the way to the final to win. Unfortunately, it never happened, and we have to talk about them because they had some huge flops there, the reason why they were not able to progress. Big flops in Germany. I'll begin with Toni Kroos, an aging guy who was retiring. We thought he was going to be very influential with the experience that he has, the technical skills, and the level of games we've seen him over the years, the way he performed at Euro 2024, never influential, never impactful. He was one of the reasons why he faltered when they lost to Spain. He's been a flop, really regrettable that was his last tournament, nothing to remember for him. So Toni Kroos, a flop for Germany. Captain Ilkay Gundogan, for long he's been very influential, the captain of the team. We know he scores as a midfielder, we know he influences the game, we know he dictates play. He used to do that at Man City, he used to do that where he was in Dortmund. Now he is at Barcelona. He's been doing that. He's a leader. He scores from midfield. He's influential. He has good skill. He's really formidable. He's won things. He's won titles. You expected him to have more impact on Germany. It never happened as a captain. The game where they eliminated, he was really poor. And I think Ilkay Gundogan also goes down as a major flop, which means for me that is ending with Musiala. Musiala, yes, he started well. The first two games, he was really wonderful. Going to the third game, he went off the boil. But once we went into the knockout stage, Musiala was nowhere. He disappeared completely. He's the new kid on the block. He's the future of German football. He's been the one who carried them to the knockout stages. Musiala then, he just completely fizzled out once the knockout stages began. Musiala then became a flop. So for me, for Germany, there were three players expecting too much from them. In the end, ending up as huge flops. Toni Kroos, Ilkay Gundogan, and Musiala. They were the flops for Germany. We go to France. Woohoo! I straight away go for a big flop, the biggest in France. That is Kylian Mbappe. How can you flop that way? We know what he can do at top tournaments. We saw him at the last World Cup in 2022. He carried France all the way to the final. We know what he did in the final. We know what he can do, what he's capable of doing. Just made his move to Real Madrid. Of course, as always, outstanding for PSG. Last season, he won the league. We know what he can do individually and also as an influence. He's influenced PSG. He's been influential for France. He couldn't score goals. He missed a lot of them. He was never into the game. He never got into the rhythm. He was never impactful. He wasted so many chances. He couldn't beat players. He couldn't even run. And yet runs are what make up the bulk of his game. He just was a flop because he couldn't score goals. When France needed him this time, he couldn't. He never looked like the best player in the world. Nothing near that. Do I want to remain or keep that tag with him? No, because he really was a flop. Kylian Mbappe, forgettable tournament that he had. Griezmann, Antoine, always there, always showing up at big tournaments. Whether it's Euro or World Cup, Antoine Griezmann has always shown up. Very influential. When he lights up, he scores goals, he assists. He was one of the players who determined the play for France. He never showed up. He really was quiet. And in the end, he ended up being a flop. Dembele, when will we ever see the true Dembele? 4 years, 5 years ago, he was one of the greatest talents to emerge, thinking that even at one time he had the world record transfer fee. But as we saw again at a big tournament for France at Euro 2024, he was a huge flop. We never saw him because of him failing to rise up to the occasion, because of Antoine Griezmann's failure, because of Kylian Mbappe's failure. Those three, the big flop that they've been, are the reason why France suffered and France never got going. Another flop for me, I'll go to Portugal. Who can I begin with? It has to be Cristiano Ronaldo. Record goal scorer in history, not just for Portugal, but the world over, including Europe. 130 goals. And here he was in a big tournament. He never scored a goal in open play. He had one assist. And what we know, if he scored, it was in the penalty shootout, meaning he didn't score a goal at the European Championships. When his team needed him in the knockout stages to carry the team, he was the biggest underperformer in both the under-16 and the quarterfinals. Of course, people kept on believing that the Cristiano Ronaldo we know will come up, a moment will come, a moment will come. It never came. Physically, he was never up to the tournament and the physicality that it required. Mentally, he was up there because he kept in the games. He tried to make a difference, but physically and also in terms of impact, it never did happen for him. Huge flop. And for me, I'll say he's the reason why Portugal were out prematurely, because instead of giving his chance to other younger deserving players, they stuck with him because they wanted to reward him, and for that he flopped. Portugal flopped, obviously. Bernardo Silva should have done more, especially when Portugal watched Ronaldo flopping. Bernardo Silva has been the influential player for Man City for now 2-3 seasons. Even in the Champions League, he is a technical player, a playmaker. He holds the ball, he carries it, he uses it wonderfully. He dribbles, he enters that box, he assists, he just takes off players, he influences. He's a dictator of games. He dictates tempo, but his playmaking skills, his dribbling, his artistry, Portugal missed it this time. It never really showed the best of Bernardo Silva, and because of that, he had a good tournament behind him. He had a good season behind him with Man City. It never showed in Euro 2024. So for me, he goes down as another flop. Obviously, we go on to Poland. They had Robert Lewandowski, their captain, record scorer. He never showed up at all. He never had an impact, he never had any influence. Poland, of course, doesn't have that many players, but usually they have him shining and coming through. At this particular tournament, he never really shone through, and as a result, Poland never went very far. England, I have to mention, also had a flop, or they have a flop. Phil Foden. We're still waiting for Phil Foden, because Phil Foden at his best, Phil Foden, vintage Foden, this England would be flying. This England would be scoring goals. This England would be scoring more than we've seen them score, even in terms of impact. Foden has been a flop. He's still part of a team that has made it to the final. He's still part of the attacking quartet that has been a bit influential for England, but in open play, in games where he thought he was going to come on and dictate tempo, he has flopped. We haven't seen the Phil Foden we are supposed to see. His talent is there, the quality is there, but at this tournament, he's been a flop. Never mind England being in the final. Netherlands, Virgil van Dijk, the captain. Yes, Netherlands went out in the semi-final. Yes, they were gritty. They put up, had performances, they showed character, but individually, in terms of play and influence and the game itself, Virgil van Dijk, for me, he was hidden. We never saw him. He hid behind a good defensive wall and organization for Netherlands, but as an individual, did we see Virgil van Dijk as we were supposed to see him? No, we never did see that. What about Belgium? Kevin De Bruyne. Always disappointing when it comes to the big tournaments. He was again a flop. He was expected to be more influential, lifting Belgium when it is suffering. He never did that. Again, he was almost lukewarm. He hid below the radar. Kevin De Bruyne, another disappointing performance, a flop. And of course, Romelu Lukaku, the record goal scorer for Belgium with 85 goals, again came nothing from him. Always getting chances, never scoring. Never being that threatening and never finding the net. For a guy who has scored 85 goals, a guy who scored goals at last Euro 2020, where he scored 4 goals, scoring nothing this time and suffering to get anywhere near scoring, was a bad lesson or a bad result. And of course, lastly, I have to mention Luka Modric for Croatia. Yes, he's done so much over the years. He's been the player for Croatia in big tournaments over the years. He's been the most important. He's been FIFA World Player of the Year, at least Ballon d'Or winner once. He's expected to influence and be the big player each time. It never happened. So for me, those were the flops. Why? Because we know what they can do. We've seen them do things in the past. This particular tournament, they never did anything. That's why the favorites, Germany, are out, France out, Belgium out, Portugal out. Why? Because all the key players, the big players, never showed up at Euro 2024. The big flops at Euro 2024, and if I'm to choose one who really stands out, for me, it has to be Cristiano Ronaldo. He was the biggest flop. Why? He is a legend, one of the best ever in world football. In his last tournament, trying to make it for Portugal, he should have done something. He should have done something. He never did even one thing. For that, and for the fact that it will be forgettable, we said farewell to him, but in such a manner, he has to go down as the biggest flop for me for Euro 2024. And that's my last word.